Welcome to this short video series which will introduce you to APIs. My name is Valentin, and in this video you'll learn about the HTTP protocol and try to understand which role it plays when working with APIs. If you have missed the previous videos, an introduction to APIs and how to use an API, make sure you click the notification icon or check the video description. So let's get started with the video. Most web APIs use HTTP to communicate, and it is essential that you understand how to build HTTP requests and to understand the parts of the HTTP messages. Before we dive deeper into HTTP, let's understand some of the terminologies used that you may have heard already. REST or RESTful is an API architecture used for working with resources, and it is hugely popular nowadays. Before REST, a popular way to share data was using SOAP, which uses the XML format to exchange data. XML is another way of representing data, like JSON is, but has become less popular nowadays. One of the reasons compared to JSON is that even if you send just a tiny bit of data, like a number, your message will still be quite large. And of course, when trying to build, for example, mobile apps, you want the communication with the server to be as fast as possible. So the more data you need to send, the slower the API performs on slow internet connections. Looking forward, in the recent years, GraphQL has grown a lot in popularity. But as most APIs rely on the REST architecture, we will discuss SOAP and GraphQL at a later time. One term that you will hear a lot is resource. And this is an API-related term which describes a piece of data, such as a customer or an order or anything else that you normally store in a database. Take, for example, the Postman API. The Postman API allows you to get some data related to Pokemons, and it's free and open to use. When you are trying to interact with an API, you want to know what kind of data is available. And when we're talking about resources, the resources are actually the data that you can get from that specific API. So if we look at a resource list, you will see here that you can get berries, you can get contests, games, items, locations. So as you can notice, there are a lot of resources that you can get. The first step you need to do when you want to use any API is to get it to work by fetching some data. And you need to know which resources are available and which addresses you need to call in order to get some data and how exactly to build your request. Say you want to use the Twitter API to post a tweet. At first, the documentation can be very confusing. And this is partly because you're not familiar with what is being described and you have absolutely no idea where to get started. You have in your mind a very specific goal, but it seems that sort of like the documentation stands between you and actually achieving what you need to do. So let's try to go back to the basics and understand how HTTP works. As you may remember, in the communication between a client and a server, HTTP messages are exchanged. The client will send an HTTP request, and the server will answer with an HTTP response. An HTTP request has the following parts. It has an HTTP method, also called an HTTP verb. It has the address or the URL where the data is requested. It also includes some headers and a body. The HTTP verb is a semantical way used especially in REST to indicate what you are trying to do. For example, get is for getting a resource, post is for creating a new resource, put is for updating an existing resource, and delete is for deleting a resource. Now, these four are probably one of the most used HTTP verbs out there, but definitely this is not the entire list of HTTP verbs available. Say you want to order some groceries online. With a post request, you will create an order. With a get request, you will be able to get the order that you have just submitted and take another look at it to see if you have everything that you ordered and if everything looks good. Now, say you notice that you have forgot to add a frozen pizza. With a put request, you can make changes to the order that you have just created. For example, by adding items, by changing the quantity, or by removing items altogether from the list, from the order. A few minutes later, you open up the fridge and you realize that you already have everything in the fridge. So for that reason, you go back to your computer, click the cancel order button, and that will send a delete request canceling the order, and this means that you will no longer get the delivery with groceries. Now that we have clarified the HTTP verb, let's move on and understand the address or the URL of the request. Oftentimes, documentations will refer to a part of the address as the base URL. And the base URL is the main address where the API exists, is the address where all requests should go, and it does not change when using the same API. An endpoint, especially in REST, is part of the address. It comes right after the base URL and typically identifies each resource. So each resource that you're trying to interact with will get its own endpoint. So the first part of the URL is the base URL, and after that /orders is the endpoint for interacting with orders. If, for example, you want to change your address or you want to revisit some profile information, the endpoint in that case probably will be something like /profile. Let me exemplify this with a service called httpbin.org, which reflects back everything that you send. So in Postman, I will open up a new request and type in httpbin.org. In itself, this is just a web page. And this is additionally also the URL for the API. The API has different endpoints, and one of these endpoints is simply get. So I will write /get. And what HTTP-bin does is to sort of reflect whatever I'm sending with a request. So by default in Postman, this is a GET request. And you will see here the HTTP verb, it's automatically put to GET. Sometimes part of the request are query parameters as well. And Postman allows you to directly add query parameters from here. So let's just say I want to send another query parameter, which is called name. And the value will be Mary. When I resend this request, HTTP-bin will reflect back this information that I have submitted. And you will see here it will show up under arguments, under args. You will have name Mary. Typically in GET request, query parameters are used to add some additional information to the request. Sometimes parameters may be mandatory, but typically they are not. So our request only included the address, which you now see includes the following part. It has the HTTP verb, which is get. It has the base URL. It has the endpoint get. And after this question mark, you will see a query parameter, and I can also add a second query parameter. And this will be again reflected back by httpbin.org. So what exactly do we have here? This lower part of the screen represents the HTTP response. So the attributes of the HTTP response are the status, headers, and the body. So the status of the request is to indicate if generally everything went okay. And this is why you see here 200 okay. Let's, for example, make a post request. If I'm sending a post request, this is something that is not allowed, not at least on this endpoint with GET. So in this case, the status code is 405. And 405 indicates that we have used the wrong method in order to interact with this endpoint. Some endpoints allow you to use all methods available, some of them only some. So it totally depends on how the API itself was programmed, was created in order to handle this. Let's go back to get and look at the other parts of the response. What we see here in the main part of the response is the response body, and you will see here it says body. And this is in the JSON format, and we have already discussed JSON and how it works. In this case, the response is simply a reflection of what we have sent. So all the data that we have sent from the request is being displayed here. The last thing from the response are the headers. We generally call this like meta information, so some additional information. For example, it will indicate that the content type, so whatever is in the response body, is in a JSON format. And this can help the client understand how to display it. As you can see, Postman knows here and automatically selects JSON as the format and enables you to see it in this way and not in this way, which may not be so nice. So far, we have only sent a GET request, and this is not always so useful. Let's open up another tab and create a POST request. So the first thing that I will do is to select the POST HTTP method. And I'm going to enter here http://bin.org, and the endpoint that I will use this time is POST. When creating a POST request, you are allowed to send some data with a request. Let's assume now that you want to submit your order for groceries. So all you have to do is to go here to this body section. And there are multiple ways on how you can submit a body. But let's just assume you are trying to submit a body using JSON format. So for that, click on raw, select JSON. And let's try to submit a simple grocery list. So first of all, we're going to have a list of products that we want. Additionally, let's add the address. And finally, the desired delivery time. So this is how we have added now the request body. Once you have selected a JSON body, Postman automatically added a new header to this request. And as you remember, headers are just a way of adding some additional information regarding what we are doing and what we want to send. And now Postman has recognized, hey, you want to send JSON? Let's tell the server in advance that what we are sending here is JSON. Because otherwise, it will make it harder for the server to understand what we are sending. For some reason, the server may support different formats. And it always helps to say in advance, hey, I'm sending you JSON, and you should parse my request body as JSON. So when we send this request, HTTP bin will again reflect back everything that we have sent. So you can look here at the JSON part, and you will see that the address, the delivery date, the delivery time, the products that we have selected are all part now of the response, just to show that HTTP bin has understood what we are trying to do. Additionally, you will see here other things that we are sending with our request, sometimes without directly knowing it. One of them is the URL, and this is exactly what we have used here. This is the endpoint. The post is the endpoint that we have used. And apart from that, you will also notice headers. Now, as you can remember, the only header that we have set, or which Postman has automatically set for us, was content type. So what is with the rest of the headers that are sent here? These are all headers that Postman automatically adds for you in order to communicate with the server, so that you don't have to manually add all these headers, which especially right now when you're just starting with APIs, don't really make a lot of sense. But it's just important to note that they are there and that Postman sends them for you. Additionally, what headers may be used for is to add some authorization and authentication data. Now, as it stands, not all APIs are public, or not all the information that you are using is publicly available. And you need to authenticate in order to have that server recognize that you are trying to do something. So it's quite common that this information will be added to headers as well. I know that this part is not very exciting, but it is quite important in learning how to deal with real APIs. Finally, I wanted to demystify a bit what exactly is with these HTTP messages, because you have this nice interface which allows you to send and retrieve data. But I wanted to show you how exactly does an HTTP message actually look like. So for that, we're going to open here the Postman console. It's located right at the bottom of the screen. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to send this request once again. Going back to the console, you'll be able to see that this request has been logged here. So if I click on it, I'll be able to extend it and to view some additional information. And what the Postman console allows you to do is again to revisit the request headers, the request body that has been sent, and the response headers and the response body. But if you click here on Show Raw Log, you'll be able to actually see the HTTP message itself. So this is actually what an HTTP request is. It just indicates that this is an HTTP post method. This is the endpoint that's being used. This is just a version of the protocol. It just lists the header here one after the other, then a new line, and then starts the body. So it's not something out of the ordinary. It is simply just a text, and the protocol gives it this significance so that anybody looking at this text will be able to tell, okay, the first part is just signalizing that the status is okay. And after that, I have a list of headers, the name, column, and then a value. And after that is a new line and starts a body. And if I'm looking for a header like content type, I can know in advance that this person is trying to send me JSON. So just to recap, a request consists of an URL, a method like get, post, put, and delete, a list of headers including like the user agent or content type, and the body, which contains some data. And again, the response contains a status code like 200 indicating that everything was okay, a list of headers, and a body. I hope this video series gave you a better understanding of what an API is and how you can work with one. Click on the end screen to continue with another video series which introduces you to Postman and shows you how you can work with more complex APIs. I hope to see you in the next series, and until then, thank you very much for watching.